I'm going to just do it for refer also for my mom. So,
sorry, my humblest apologies, Kevin. I should have said that for your mom. I'm so sorry. The shir we have in mind for your mom's refuah.
Okay, great. Yes, the name.
Please say your mom's Hebrew name, please.
Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta.
Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. Thanks.
All right. In her schus and merit, read the Mishnah.
Okay, great. Okay. If two oxen that were tam fought with and injured one another through acts of keren, they pay for the excess half damages. If both were muad, then they pay for the excess full damages. If one was tam and the other muad, if the damage done by the muad to the tam is greater, he, the muad, pays for the excess full damages. If the damage done by the tam to the muad is greater, he, the tam, pays for the excess half damages. The Mishnah continues, and similarly, if two people injured one another, they pay for the excess full damages. Similarly, if a person and a muad animal injured each other and the damage done by the person to the muad to the person is greater, he, the one who did the greater damage, pays for the excess full damages. If a person and a tam animal injured each other and the damage done by the person to the tam is greater, if the damage done by the tam to the person is greater, if the damage done by the person to the tam is greater than he, the person, pays for the excess full damages. If the damage done by the tam to the person is greater than its owner pays, then its owner pays for the excess half damages. Rabbi Akiva says, even in the case of a tam that injures a person, more than a person injures it, its owner pays for the excess full damages.
Excellent, excellently read. All right, so we're going to concentrate piece by piece, a quick summary for a few minutes, guys. Gavin, I owe you an apology for yesterday for causing you a little bit of stress with the time. I should have put it on the group. Humblest apologies. So because sometimes there can be a bit of miscommunication, and it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. The reality is if I put it on the group, it clears up any misconception. Sorry about that. All right, let's get started. If two oxen that were tam fought with and injured one another through the act of keren, they pay for the excess half damage. Okay, so I want to just go through the case of two oxen being tam a second. All right, so Akiva, there's a principle that we learn here. Okay, now this is before we make anybody culpable. The first thing that has to be assessed, this was a question that Arthur had for me yesterday after we were finished the group shir. He said to me, it kind of is unfair that the tam person of the ox has to pay because he's not responsible. And then I realized that Arthur wasn't sure about a case of who started what was involved. So before we work out the payments of the tam and the muad, the first thing that we have to do is say, listen, which animals are responsible or which people are responsible? So you've got the following default positions: animal attacking animal, person and animal attacking each other. Those are your two default positions. Within that position, you've got muad animal attacking tam, tam attacking muad, or muad and muad, tam and tam. Then with people and an animal, you have a person's naturally muad, and according to Rabbi Akiva, there's no such thing as a tam when an animal attacks a person. According to the rabbis, an animal can be tam or muad when it attacks a person. Those are your default positions. What we're talking about here is a culpability issue with regards to reaction time. Okay? So what we're saying is here is that Rashi explains that what happens is if we evaluate the damage to both the oxen, right? If both the damages are equal in value, they cancel each other out and neither owes one anything. So if we took a fictitious case and Gavin and Kevin's ox attacked each other and they caused each other 40 zuz worth of damage, it doesn't make sense that Gavin takes out 40 zuz and gives it to Kevin and Kevin takes out 40 zuz and gives it to Gavin. It's a silly exercise. So then they cancel each other out and they both take the 40 zuz loss because it's even. When you start to pay is if the excess is either way. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Fine. So at that point, That's the one issue dealing with. Now, so only if the damage of one exceeds the other, then the owner of the less damage one pays to the other owner the difference. So they're not going to be equal in damage. Sometimes what had happened, surprisingly, is even if an ox is tame, it might give bigger damage because the animal might be bigger, or it might hit a vital organ and kill that animal. So the first thing is, please don't confuse tum with the amount of damage. That's a second mistake I see people making, is that they automatically assume tum means less damage caused. Tum doesn't mean less damage caused. Tum means because the ox was tame, your penalty is less or your compensation is less. We discussed whether tum was a compensation or penalty, but be that as it may, that has nothing to do with the amount of damage. Amount of damage is a separate issue which could be caused by a tum or muad. The only difference is if a tum causes that damage, you pay half the amount of the damage up to the gufa, the body of the attacking animal. So the only thing, there's a leniency in terms of the amount of payment. But of course, it could be that the tum animal damages more than the muad, because the muad animal might be a puny little thing or not hit a vital organ, and the tum might do serious damage. So it doesn't mean that it's less damage. It just means that for whatever damage there are certain mitigating factors which reduce the pain, but doesn't mean the damage is less. Second misconception cleared. Third issue is that who started it and response time. This occurs both with humans and with animals. So, for example, we learn an overlying principle. I think you remember this, Kiva, that whenever one acts irregularly and someone else comes along and acts irregularly against him, the second one is not liable. We've learned this in the case of a person and an animal. So if Arthur's minding his own business in a coffee shop in Renana and somebody comes and shouts at his wife and points his finger at his wife, Arthur's going to get up and break his jaw. Why? Is Arthur not responsible? Because the person should have said to his wife, listen, you parked me in, or I'm not happy what you did, and had a discussion. The minute he gets threatening to his wife, then Arthur has every right to defend both himself and her, because the first person acted irregularly, and therefore if your reaction in self-defense is irregular, you're not liable. Make sense? Got it? Fine. Right. Now we're going to deal with another issue, and that is what you call justified response. So, for example, someone breaks in your house, you don't shoot them at point blank range in the head. It doesn't go well for you. They were stealing candlesticks. So you don't shoot the top of the head with a shotgun. What you might want to do is warn them, but if they pull out a weapon, you might want to show them from the knees down so that they end up maybe in a wheelchair. Think about what they did for a while they're sucking through a straw, but not dead. So in other words, your response reaction is proportionate to the level of attack. So we learned this with the case of a Roidef in Sanhedrin, is that your first job is to disable the attacker, not to kill the attacker. If you have no choice, fine. If you're a bad aim, you should have picked a different career. But be that as it may, your response has to be reasonable. Now, Akiva, I'm going to ask you a question. What happens if my ox attacks your ox and your ox responds by killing my ox? In other words, your animal's reaction is out of proportion to my animal aggravating your ox. What happens then in your thought?
So then I would be liable for the excess damage because it was quite a vicious attack.
No, you're missing the question. I'm going to state it again. Okay. My ox, Damon's ox, attacked Akiva's ox. Okay. And your ox, but it did a mild attack and yours killed my ox in response. Are you saying you have to pay the excess because it was a vicious attack? Fair enough. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we learn no. We learn no. Why? Because an animal can't measure its response. Meaning, if my animal started it and yours reacted, Your animal is not responsible for reacting. According to the rule, whenever one acts irregularly and someone else or another animal comes along and acts irregularly against him, the second one is not liable. We learned that with animals, that one stops suddenly and another one kicks the animal in front of it. You remember that? So the thing of it is, before we even work out what you owe me and if it's excessive damage, the first thing is we have to work out the reactionary time. So you have to pay on two circumstances. Circumstance number one, my animal attacks yours, and your animal thinks about it for 5 minutes, gets annoyed, comes back, and claps my animal. So it's had sufficient time not to be an instinctive reaction. Or the two animals attack each other simultaneously, they're both to blame. But if I come today and I slap somebody and they don't react, and tomorrow they come and hit me with a baseball bat, they've had sufficient time to cool down, go to the store, get a bat, come back and clip me. Therefore, they're responsible. That's not a reaction. It's not like I slap somebody and they turn around and they punch me. That's reaction. So if there's sufficient time between this attacked or provoked animal responding, then that second animal is liable because it's not a reactionary position. It's a thought out position. Or if both the animals attack each other, then both are responsible. But not if it's an instantaneous response to the first animal attacking the second. Even if the second animal kills the first animal, which is out of proportion to what the first animal did, the attacking animal, because an animal can't measure its response and it's merely reactionary. Makes sense?
100%.
Okay, Kivs, makes sense to you? Kiva?
I think I'll keep it at work, guys. So
He said that there was noise. He put a mess at the chat.
Okay. All right, but guys, that should be fairly clear. We can move on.
Yeah.
All right. I hope I explained it okay. Okay, so before we even look at payments, who's to blame, reactionary time, time doesn't necessarily mean less money payment. It just means more leniency in terms of amount you have to pay. We've cleared up some misconceptions. Great place to start. So I'm now going to test you guys. How's this? What is the difference between the Rosh explaining Rashi and the Rambam? What's their... Ooh, Akiva's joining us. Saved by Akiva.
maybe not. Let's see.
How's it, Akivs?
Good.
Good. Listen, I know you can't talk, you're at work, but if you have any questions, you must just ask. I hope I explained it all right for you.
No, there's a little bit of background noise, so I just try and keep my mouth on mute most of the time.
That's fine, as long as I'm explaining it okay for you. If you have any questions, just ask, my friend. Okay,
Great. I'm listening.
All right, so listen, I'm not
So
going to...
basically, you're saying that... okay, I'll try to get a summary at the end. Maybe you can just send a summary at the...
No, I've spoken the summary. That's fine. You've hopped it. You're a bright guy. Are we just going to discuss the summary now of the Rosh explaining Rashi versus the Rambam's opinion on how damages work? And we're talking about now the second part, guys, which I want you to bear in mind. We're now talking about a case of how do I put this correctly? Is we're talking about a case now where if two oxen that were time fought and injured one another through acts of keren, they pay for excess half damages. If both were muad, they'd pay for excess full damages. And we're now going to discuss also a case if one was tam and the other was muad. This is the focus of the conversation. Now, if the damage was done by the muad to the tam is greater, the muad pays excess full damages. And if the damage done by the tam to the muad is greater, the tam pays excess half damages. So far, so good. It's fairly clear. Now, what I was going to say is, does anybody remember the Rosh explaining Rashi or the Rambam? Or do you want me to give you a summary on that, guys?
I remember it.
You remember it?
Yeah,
Do you remember
I went through Damon with it.
Okay, but do you remember it clear enough not to confuse Akiva?
Well, I can try.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Just
Okay, the Rosh opinion of Rashi was that, let's say the animal was tam and the other one was muad, and there was 40 damage from the tam animal and 100 damage from the muad animal. Okay. Basically, the 40 cancels the 40, and he only has to the muad animal only has to pay. The muad owner only has to pay 60. But with what's the other guy? The
Rambam.
name?
Rambam and
Rambam. Rambam Tofot said no, because the animal was tam. Okay, the guy is only responsible for 20 out of the 40. So the other guy actually has to pay him 80.
Arthur, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes
That's
sense.
it. Let's go start here. Check out the way. The food just arrived. Okay. It's got a delivery. This is timing. Okay. So I
Arthur,
explained
that's
it
brilliant.
nicely.
That's perfect. Perfect.
George, come here. Inside.
Okay, I'm feeling nauseous and giddy.
Okay, great.
I'm getting motion.
Brilliant. Sorry. I'm going to go sit down.
All right.
Just got to deliver the cat food and all that stuff. Sorry, let me go sit down.
They delivered
Okay,
another
so
cat.
that's-
What do you mean? You've got
No, cat food.
Hey.
Cat food and
Okay.
Bro, I go through about 18 kilograms of cat food in about 3 weeks.
Wow. Okay. So let's get back to the shear. Sure, it's a lot of
Yeah.
cat food. So Akiva, did you understand what Arthur was saying, or can I break it down for you? Arthur was dead on perfect, by the way.
Is that in 30? Is that in 35B? Not in the A, eh? It's the B side already.
No, it's in the A side,
Try again, Damon.
33A. Yeah?
It's as hard to Arthur because it is in the background.
Okay, but Arthur was amazing. I'll give you a summary.
Okay.
All right, so basically there are two opinions. There's the Rosh explaining Rashi, and there's the Rambam and Tosfot that's on the same page. How do we know that Tosfot is on the same page? Well, the truth of it is actually Rambam's on the same page as Tosfot because Rambam came later, as you know. So Tosfot said that there wasn't anything new that we learned in this particular part of the daf, which proves he goes according to the standard opinion that we've learned thus far. So what is that? Well, that's very simple. That if, for example, that there was a case of if the muad, for example, as Arthur said, inflicted 100 zuz worth of damage to the tam, right? And the tam inflicted 40 zuz worth of damage to the muad, okay? Then what would happen is, according to the Tosfot, at which Rambam also holds, is that we say, hang on a second, what did the tam damage? 40 zuz. What does the tam have to pay? Half of that, 20 zuz, up to the gufa of the attacking animal. Does that make sense? And only limited to the attacking animal. That's the maximum. So if the attacking animal is worth much less than half of the damage, that's the limit. Okay, that we've learned so far, Kiva, it shouldn't be any issue. And then if the muad owes 100 zuz, he would have to pay 100 zuz from choice property. And then obviously the tam then pays 20 zuz from the limit of the damaging animal, which means the tam owner has to pay 20 zuz, which is half of 40, to the muad animal owner. And then the muad animal owner would have to pay 100 zuz, the full payment from choice property, to the tam animal that was damaged. In other words, what's happening here is 20 take away from 100 is the muad animal owner only has to pay 80 zuz to the tam animal owner. Is that clear? That's very straightforward. We learned that up until now.
Yeah, that's what we've learned up till now primarily.
Kiva, does that make sense? It's nothing new, this part.
Right, okay.
Okay, I mean, are you with me? So in other words, the owner of the tam pays half the damage. So if the animal damaged 40, the owner pays 20 up to the gufa of the attacking animal. Then the Muad also attacked the Tam at the same time. There was 100 zuz of damage, so the owner pays 100 zuz worth of damage. So if the Tam owes him 20 out of the 40, and the Muad owes 100 out of the 100, the Muad owner only has to give the 80 zuz different to the Tam animal owner. Very straightforward maths, nothing complicated. So that's Tosfot in Rambam. Now, we learned something interesting from the Rosh explaining Rashi. We learn that the part at which they overlap, there's no such thing as Tam half payment at all. So, which means as follows. Take the 100 zuz example. So, if the Tam animal inflicted 40 zuz into the Muad animal and the Muad inflicted 100 zuz, the first 40 zuz are disregarded by both parties. How does the Rosh explaining Rashi derive this? Because the words in the Mishnah is he pays for excess damage. He doesn't pay for the whole damage, he pays for excess damage, which means the part they have in common, there's no such factoring of Tam, even if the animal's Tam, because both animals started with each other. It's not like in the case before, where we learned only the Tam was attacking. Here, both animals attacked each other. We never learned a case like this before. So Rosh explaining Rashi says, listen, the damage that they have in common, there's no such thing as halving it or Tam. Both animals are to blame. Cancel that out. So there's 40 that the Tam owes and the 100 that the Muad owes. So the overlapping 40 is cancelled, which means that the Muad animal owner only owes the difference of 60 and the full payment of 60 because it's Muad to the Tam animal owner. So instead of paying 80, he only owes 60. Does that make sense, Akiva?
Yeah, and the Tam?
No, they cancel each other out because.
So the Tam's done. He doesn't have to, because it's cancelled, is out. He's out of the picture now.
Yes, but in other words, the Tam doesn't get any leniency of 20 zuz out of 40.
I understand that.
Yeah. Akiva, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I'd just like to see it in a summary format.
Okay, but you can always go back to the Gemara. So all I'm saying is principally, I mean, you're virtually an accountant because basic maths is no problem for you. So all I'm saying is the damage that they cause each other that is cancelled each other out. There's no such thing if it's a Tam that it's half payment. It's only the excess that's halved. So in other words, if the Tam did more damage to the Muad than the Muad did to the Tam, on the excess, he would pay half the damage. He'd pay the leniency, but not the amount of damage that they have in common. That's worked out as a full calculation. So if, for example...
Damon, sorry, just one second. This only applies if the two start with each other simultaneously.
Yes.
And that's the goal. Otherwise, you wouldn't do this. You'd go back to the old.
No. If they don't attack each other simultaneously, basically, if they don't attack each other simultaneously, then it's either disregarded because the one animal is reacting to the other, or this is when two animals attack each other. It's not one attacking the other. If it's one attacking the other, then it goes back to the previous arrangement. So, Akiva, what Gavin's saying is as follows. This is a new arrangement, Rosh explaining Rashi, when the two animals go for another. It's not one animal attacking another. Because what we've learned in our history is if a Tam attacks another animal, it's half payment up to the limit of the body of the attacking animal. And a Muad pays full damage from choice property. Now, it's the first time we're learning of a case where two oxen attack each other. So according to this explanation, the amount of damage they have in common is not halved, even if an animal happens to be Tam. You only halve the excess damage. In other words, if the Tam did more damage to the Muad, then that excess damage that the Tam owner would have to pay is halved to the Gufar of the attacking animal. But if the Muad animal did more damage than the Tam, he pays full the excess. That's what the Mishnah is saying to a T.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, John.
Akiva?
Yeah.
Is it making sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm saying you don't have to necessarily see it. You have to see it for Zora, but I want to see if what we're saying makes sense.
Okay, so I'm going to have a look later and do some chazorah.
Okay, but do you want to explain it to us? Just want to see you got it.
I need to do some chazorah with it, Damon.
Okay, no problem. Nobody's on the hot seat. Will you do chazorah? Then I'm happy. I'm happy.
Yeah,
All right.
100%.
So listen, it's not that easy the first time you hear it. Okay, so it's, as Arthur explained, very, very straightforward. Now let's go on to the Mishnah. Now we're discussing the point when you've got human damage, etc. And similarly, two people injure one another, they pay for the excess full damage. Why? Because a human being is always muad and responsible for the actions. Also, if two people injure each other, you have to pay the 4 other payments, guys. In other words, apart from Nezak Shalom, the actual damage, you pay for medical bills, which is the healing refuah, you pay for you pay for pain, you pay for convalescing, shavat, and you pay for humiliation. Okay? Because it's intent to do grievous bodily harm. Right. Now we're going to talk about an animal and a muad. So, a muad animal and a human being. Both the muad animal and the human being is also muad. Whoever does the greater damage pays the excess of payment. That's clear. There's only one issue that we have here, and that is what happens if a person is attacked by a tum animal. So the rabbis say that if a tum animal attacks a person, it's only half damages on the excess, whereas obviously, Tosfot says it's half damages on the whole amount, not just the excess. But be that as it may, it's half damages for a tum. But Rabbi Akiva says when it comes to a tum animal attacking a human being, there is no such thing as half damages. No such thing at all. Does that make sense? So we're going to see where Rabbi Akiva gets us. Now we're going to hit the Gemara. The Gemara cites a brisa that presents the respective sources of the Tana Kamma and Rabbi Akiva in their dispute about whether one pays half of full damages for keren tam, damage done to a person. The rabbis taught in a brisa, the verse states, in accordance with this law shall be done to it. So what does it mean, done to it? Okay. So what we're saying is there's a verse in Shmot, chapter 21, verse 31, which says, and if an ox shall gore a man or a woman and the person dies, the ox shall surely be stoned and its flesh shall not be eaten. And the owner of the ox is absolved. But if the ox was a habitual gorer from yesterday and the day before, and its owner had been warned, but did not guard it, and it killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and even its owner should be put to death. But an atonement payment, which is the kofar payment, guys, shall be assessed against him, and he shall pay as a redemption for his life whatever shall be assessed against him, whether it calls a boy or a girl, in accordance with the judgment shall be done to it. So according to the plain meaning, the passage basically refers to an ox that kills a person, and it doesn't discuss payment of damages. However, since if you look at that particular verse, it simply could have stated, so shall be done to it, instead of the superfluous expression in accordance with this law. That extra word in accordance with this law is basically expounded to mean that it includes a case when an ox injures a person. Okay? So that's where it gets the laws as far as damages is concerned. So, which is expounded to mean like the law for an ox that does damage to an ox, so too is the law for an ox that does damage to a person. So what it means is the rabbis learn that just like an ox that does damage to another ox, if it's tam, it's half payment. So too, when an ox that's tam does damage to a person, it's half payment damage. That's how they extrapolate it, because the law is stated elsewhere. So that's the opinion of the rabbis. Okay. So the tam pays half damages and the muad full damages. to an ox, and so too with a person. Right. But what does Rabbi Akiva say? He said, no, we don't expound like that. We expound in accordance with this law, meaning in accordance with the second one and not in accordance with the first. What does he mean? The second law is about a muad animal, which means just like we read that when a muad ox damages another ox, it pays full payment, we extrapolate the second part of the law, which says if an ox, even if it's tam, attacks a person, we derive the law from the second law, meaning the law of muad when it comes to a person. And that's how it's expounded. Are you with me? That's his difference of opinion, is that you only apply the secondary law when it attacks a person. In terms of whether it's a tam or a muad, its status becomes muad automatically when it attacks a person. Okay? So Rabbi Akiva continues, it would be possible to say then that in the case of tam that injures a person, one pays even from choice property. Therefore, the Torah shall be done to it, which indicates that he pays from its body, but he does not pay from choice property. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, listen, we still learn something from the first passage. What do we learn from the first passage? The first passage, bit of a tongue twister, is that we learn from the first passage the law that is done to it, meaning that even though we pay full payment, it's still limited to the gufa of the attacking tam animal. So one of the leniencies applies. So this is what you call a kol v'chomer and a dayu. So the dayu comes to restrict the case where, just like the kol v'chomer that a muad ox that attacks an ox would pay full damages, and a tam ox it would pay full damages if it attacked a human being. The dayu comes to restrict it to and restrain it to the limitation of a tam animal with respect to paying from a maximum of the body of the attacking animal. So one of the constraints appear, that's the dayu, and that is that it's muad payment, but not from choice property, but limited to the body of the attacking animal, even if it's tam. Does that make sense, guys? So he does restrain it somewhat. All right. So I think I've explained it very clearly. What I want Kevin to do is teach us a few halachas, and I want to end off for today, guys. I did my best. I hope I did all right.
Great.
Okay, continuing on the theme of lighting candles on Shabbos. There we go. Okay, if one has been invited out for the Friday night meal, one should nevertheless kindle lights at home before Shabbos, in order that way one might derive benefit from these lights. One should either remain at home until it's dark or ensure that the candles are of sufficient length that they will still be burning upon one's return, as we said yesterday. Certain authorities permit an electric light to be used as a Sabbath light. This view may be relied upon if one is confined to the hospital, where kindling of lights is often discharged. Remember what I said yesterday? What I do, I said you can do it yourself. It's talking about a hospital here, but there was an opinion that you could actually do it at home as a substitute for candles, because you know that the light would be on when you get home.
Okay.
Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says the blessed Sabbath with the manna, and it is sanctified with lights. That's from Mechilta. Another thing, source from Bereshit Rabbah. As a reward for being meticulous with the Sabbath light, a light shone at all times. It's at Sarah's tent. When Sarah died, the light disappeared. But it reappeared after Yitzchak married Rivka. And another source here from Hagaon Rav Yeshaya Horovitz. The root of creation was the first day when Hashem created light. Light was basic to all his creations. Sabbath is therefore ushered in by kindling Sabbath lights, and is followed on its termination with the kindling of the Havdalah light. So, as with wine, there's a huge candle light plays an important role, and we kindle candle lights for many functions. Shabbos, Yortzites, Chanukah, Chagim, Havdalah, as it just says. I don't know where else. and they burnt. They have the Ner Tamid, which sometimes I think may have been a flame. I don't know. In the net, in the shul, that permanent light. Maybe it was a fire in ancient days. In ancient times, it might have been a fire because there was no electricity.
And there was a permanent, was a menorah going as well.
So that was a fire as well. That was a flame. So
So I
it's
just want to ask you
very.
something, Kevin. Just that first thing you said. If we go out to guest, I know it's not that common now, but it's going to start happening again. If you go to guest, you say we shouldn't light Shabbat
Candles, because if you say the bracha, you're not going to get the benefit of the bracha, and it could be a bracha of atala. Saying Hashem's name in vain, because you're not getting the benefit of the point, because you need to, the candles bring peace and harmony and happy atmosphere into the home with that light. But speak to someone, just double check, because I heard you could do it and I do it. But double check, just come back to me with what.
I mean, that's part of
You're close to Rabbonim there. You know more Rabbonim than I do, Kevin.
Yeah, because they're watching me to make sure I don't do something wrong. But
Gavin, come back to that. Please come back.
Yeah, find out from your mates, your Rabbonim, your connections, Kevin.
No, I'm going to speak to Rabbi Abach about it. That's the bit. All right.
Ask him. I heard you could do it. Because
well done for today. I tell you something, you gave over the Rosh, the Rambam, Rashi, Tosfot, like a Talmud Chochem, Chana. And Kevin, I hope your mom makes a full refuah. And after just the last 2 days, you've been really, really